My name is Mike Loughnane. This is a great opportunity for me. I'm very grateful to the opportunity to talk to you for a few minutes. My own background is in law enforcement. I was 26 years doing complex white-collar crime cases in the Inspector General community, ranging within the EPA and Department of Transportation. I know that may not seem like it ties in. I'll try to tie that in. Then for the last 6 years, I was engaged in training in anti-money laundering, counter-finance, and terrorism in the Department of Defense, where I trained various groups within the federal government in counter-threat finance issues, and it was one of the more interesting elements that I've enjoyed. The topic I'm going to discuss with you today, and by the way, forgive my Boston accent. I get nervous and the Boston accent comes out because most of my heroes are actually here that I've tracked and followed over the years. The only ones that aren't here are the New England Patriots, so forgive me for that. Bottom line up front, because I know we're very short on time, is I want to give you the recommendations, then I'll describe them. And I think the prior presenters really well framed what I want to talk to you about, so I hopefully can keep this short. The first recommendation is within the financial system, under the Bank Secrecy Act, under the USA Patriot Act, there's a requirement to identify by financial institutions what's known as politically exposed persons. So when I started thinking about the concept of kleptocrats, you realize that kleptocrats, probably by definition, fit within this definition of being a politically exposed person. And I'll cover that in a second. The point is that we're already collecting this information about individual kleptocrats. We heard a presentation discussing the corporation rules that are coming through, which are certainly going to be important. But we also have information about individual accounts and individual activity of the kleptocrats who are using these systems, once they've done whatever deed they're doing in their countries, putting that money into networks so they can ultimately make use of it for themselves. So can we disrupt that? And is information already available? The point is, yes, it is. So my point is, if we have this as an opportunity, then if we can get that information into a database where we can analyze it and identify the networks that the kleptocrats are working in, then that gives us a decided advantage to disrupt their network and maybe get their assets back, going beyond just corporations' information, beyond the information that's currently being worked. The second is, I'm sorry, did I push the second one is information sharing. This is an important one, and it goes back, and I'm going to speak from the U.S. perspective, the Bank Secrecy Act, which formed in 1970. One of the fundamental thoughts to the Bank Secrecy Act was that the banks are in the best position to know the customer. They know the plans of the customer, they know the workings of the customer, and they're the ones that would best identify the anomalous activity that would attribute to a customer. Well, obviously with today's technology and the world as it is today, that's not the same. We have a whole lot of information that's collected through the government, through intelligence, through law enforcement, and we need the opportunity for those two places to meet, where the information that's been collected on the financial side can be put into place that can be matched against the intelligence information to get a better definition and picture of those networks that are being formed. Now, certainly law enforcement has the capability of collecting this information. You know, they use tools such as subpoenas or other legal documents to obtain that information from banks, which is one of the reasons they collect it. But that's a reactive process. That's one where, hey, we think something's going on, so let's collect this information and see where it takes us, as opposed to a proactive approach, which is how do we tie this in to identify the overall network? I don't want to necessarily just know the PEP or his activity. I want to know about the person who is setting up the accounts for him. I want to know the business relationships that the banks have identified, and then match that up to what's been identified from an intelligence law enforcement perspective to put together a better frame, a better profile of those individuals and their networks. So those are the recommendations I'm going to offer here. Let's go through them very quickly. If you haven't seen the term before, this is the general definition of a politically exposed person. Under the Bank Secrecy Act, it is a foreign person, is a politically exposed person. But look at the general definition here. Doesn't kleptocrat fit under here? Not only them, but their family and their business associates. It creates the universe in which we're already collecting the information. We're requiring this information to be collected. I'm simply suggesting we get better access to it. The as I said, already in place. Within the financial institutions, you've heard the term, I think Brad brought it up, of enhanced security, enhanced due diligence. They actually have to go the extra step to collect this information. They have to ask more questions, and they retain that information. They have to have ongoing monitoring. So there's somebody watching these things all the time, which, by the way, if you put it on the illicit side, they're going to build the structures that they can to avoid that detection. That's frankly the game that's going on today. I think everyone can understand that. So what is the information collected, and how can it be best analyzed? Who has the best picture and capability to work with that information, putting it together? So I'm not suggesting all the banking information about the politically exposed person be put into a database. My suggestion is that in law enforcement, we used to always get not credit reports, but the header information to a creditor. Talked about the individual, addresses, general information. It didn't talk about the credit information. That was a whole nother story to get. But the general information was available, and you could collect that information and use that for analysis. So the general information about the accounts, who opened the account, who was the signatory on the account, who are the entities that are seen doing business in those accounts. This kind of information, matching it up to what's being collected on the intelligence side or the law enforcement side, could give a far greater profile of kleptocratic activity. Is it expected that a bank would know that it's kleptocratic? Probably not. They may not have that view, but the intelligence and law enforcement sector may. So they have, similar to the rule that Elise brought up, there's a rule coming in place in May 2018 that FinCEN is pushing out that requires additional information to be collected. Just as was presented in the last presentation, this one requires collection of legally covered entities within a financial institution, which again are the businesses. And this is why Elise said, coming back and say, we want that paper that says who has control of ownership. These are the requirements that are being put in place against the businesses. Ownership, control, and then the banks have to actually have a verification process to that information. So think about that as you're working in a kleptocratic analysis. Here is a wealth of information that could be of value to that analysis. So I believe that what I'm suggesting in perspective of collection of information, it's consistent with the BSA as it stands today. We already have information on a regular basis that's submitted to FinCEN, the most common one being currency transaction reports. These are information, any transaction in cash over $10,000 gets reported, with exceptions, but generally speaking, to FinCEN, and it's maintained in a database. And it has information about who's involved in the transaction, and the entities involved, and the money involved, and it can be used for analysis. You also have suspicious activity reports, which are more protected. But again, when the banks identify something anomalous that qualifies for that, they submit that information, and that is kept on a far more confidential, secret nature, but it is still helpful in conducting the analysis. We have, well, I'll get to the other ones in a minute. So I believe that, and with the beneficial ownership rule that's coming out, that's collecting of information that's of value. The laws, the bills that are pending is consistent with it. We're collecting information into a data set that we can use for a broader analysis, and the government is in a better position to perform that analysis for the purposes. We have 314A blasts. You heard Brad talk about 314As. Well, they're very limited in what they are providing. They simply have a come back if you have information on this target, on this individual, on this company. And what are the banks going to do? They're going to answer yes or no and give you the opportunity as a law enforcement organization to go and collect that information. All well and good. Meanwhile, what's the bank going to do? They might close the account because they have a risk issue they've got to deal with. So that's a risk factor in the sharing of information that's recognizable. You have the commerce list, you have the OFAC lists that list the people that you shouldn't be doing business with. And I think I was at a presentation Dave Williams was sponsoring last year. He'll be the leader of the working group that's coming up later. And I think this solidified the point to me very clearly. We have a whole lot of information that comes from the banking and financial sector up into the government, which we use for purposes of analysis. We give very little information back. We give individual names, we make requests, 314A requests, that kind of thing. certainly we have that information and it's of value. But other than that, informal contacts, there's really not much information that trickles down from the government that might be supportive to the financial and private sector to be more effective as acting as our data collectors, which is what we have them do today. So my suggestion to the second point is adopt a better information sharing program where more information can be shared to improve the information detection, the anomalous detection process that financial institutions have. The case I want to present to you is ongoing in the UK right now, the Joint Money Laundering Intelligence Task Force. Has anyone heard of that? I'm sure many of you have. I think it's a significant effort on improving the communication and coordination. Remember something as a simple point. We have since 1970 expected financial institutions and the regulated entities to act as our primary sensors. We're not doing a very good job in feeding those sensors to be more effective and more sensitive to identify information that we want to make use of. So, this is the GMLIT vision, providing an environment for the financial sector and government to enhance and analyze, with an S, intelligence to detect and prefer. We have the operations group. Look at the entities that are listed here that are vetted to participate in the task force. So you have a better synergy of public and private through this kind of information sharing. They're better prepared on how to deal with the risk factors associated with their customers and can provide a better quality data information source to the government in the UK for purposes of analysis and response. So in summary, I want to say again, I think that we have an issue where we already have a program based on the law to have the information collected by a financial institution and regulated entities to be submitted to the government for data collection and analysis. Information about politically exposed persons, defined as foreign persons, certainly could fit within that communication flow. It's consistent with the movement today, such as beneficial ownership statutes legislation, the FinCEN rule that's coming out to provide that information to the government for better analysis. And I think in a kleptocratic environment, it will help identify their networks and opportunities for disruption. The second point is information sharing, where we have to point them into a better direction, give them better information for them to be more effective in information collection, knowing better questions to ask, knowing where to focus further, more effectively. With that, I thank you for your time, and hopefully we'll have, if any questions, we'll be able to discuss it in the working group. Thank you.